Okay, we're going to be using the Sculpt tools in Blender. They're not quite as advanced as ZBrush or ZBrush or Mudbox, but just to get a sense of how sculpting works in 3D modeling, it is pretty cool. So I'll show you a couple tricks here. So the first thing I want to do is to delete my starting cube. Okay, so you can just press X, you get the delete dialog box, and just click OK. And I want to create a UV sphere. That's what I'm going to start with. Okay, so you can go under the create panel on the side here, create UV sphere. Another thing you can do, and let me just undo that. If you hit the space bar, this is a nice way to add things. It's like a search, and it'll search all of the different possible things you can do with Blender, and then I can find UV sphere there. Okay, so you should all have a sphere on your screen. I'm going to press S now to scale it up, just make it a bit bigger. It'll make it easier to work with. Okay, now another thing with sculpting is you want to kind of get rid of these distracting things like the camera, light, this grid. We don't need that right now. So what I can do is press N to get the view options. And if you go to under display, you can click only render. Okay, so you see everything else disappears. And then you can press N again to hide that panel. Okay, so we're almost ready to start sculpting. I'm going to do one more thing, and that's to add a modifier. So the modifiers are under the wrench in your toolbar. You might have to drag this out a little bit in order to see it, depending on how your screen is set up. Okay, so click on that wrench. I'm going to add a modifier, and I want to add the multi-resolution modifier. It's under Generate. And multi-resolution, it's pretty cool because it allows you to subdivide a shape. So you see right now, you can see all these squares, right? If I click Subdivide, it's going to divide every square into 4. So it kind of makes it a more HD image, I guess. And the nice thing about the multi-resolution modifier is that you can set the subdivision for preview, sculpt, and render independently. So what that means is if you... Okay, the reason why you'd want to use a multi-resolution modifier is because sometimes it's difficult to render lots of subdivisions in a preview mode. So if I'm spinning around, you see how it's nice and smooth? If I had too many subdivisions, let me just subdivide like, I don't know, 6 times. Okay, now it's super smooth, but it's going to take a lot to render this in real time. So what you could do is you could bring down the number of subdivisions we have in preview to 4. Okay, now it's a lot smoother. Maybe even less than that, maybe 3. Okay, but then when I actually render that, if I hit F12 to render, it's actually going to take a while, but I've got really nice render quality. Okay, I'm not even going to bother rendering that because it's going to take too long with 6. So what I would actually recommend doing is setting your subdivision to 4. So set your values to 4. And you can do that by clicking Subdivide to add a new level of subdivision. Okay, so we're ready to enter sculpt mode. So right here down at object mode, I'm going to click on that and go to sculpt mode. Okay, another thing that you could do is you can open and hide these tools with T. So if you don't have the tools already open, T will open and hide them. And then you can press Shift Space to enter full screen mode. Okay, so we can really focus on what we're sculpting. Okay, one more thing, I would recommend clicking front faces only, because otherwise if you don't click that, you could be affecting the faces behind the object, which doesn't really make sense for sculpting. Okay, so check off front faces only. And now I'm going to show you what the sculpting looks like. You can set your radius of your brush here and your strength. So you can see I'm just kind of clicking and painting, and that's creating a little bit of a bump. Okay, one more thing. By default, it's got a mirror on there, see? Which is kind of neat for some things, but I actually don't want a mirror on right now. So that's going to be under, I believe that's under edit or object mode. So I'm going to go back to object mode. Let's see the where is that now? Oh, here it is. Sorry, it's actually under, it's still in sculpt mode, and it's under symmetry. So right now X is highlighted, so that means when I paint something, it's going to mirror it on the X axis. So you can use that for if you're doing a face, for instance, you want both sides of the face to be, maybe making the nose, and then I want, if I want it to be symmetrical, you can do that. But for now, I'm just going to turn that off. So you can turn off mirror. Okay, so when you click, it raises up. That's what you're doing. You're just basically pulling the material out. If you hold Control and click, then it's going to push it back in. Okay, so my screen's kind of freezing up here, but there we go. Okay, so Control will do the inverse. You can see here you can actually select add or subtract. So depending on what you're on, if you're on subtract and you hold Control, it's going to add. Okay, and vice versa. So that's a quick way to switch between the tools. Another shortcut is if you press Shift F, then you can actually choose how strong your influence is. So you can see if it was out here, it's going to make a very small difference. Whereas if I press Shift F again and go to here, it's going to make a very big difference. Okay. One more thing, you notice how this is kind of jagged? I'm actually going to go back to object mode and turn on smoothing. So shading, I'm going to make that smooth. That will make my model look a little bit better. Okay, so that's in object mode. You can just set it to smooth. Oops, I want to go to sculpt mode. There we go. Okay, the last thing I'll show you here before I kind of unleash you on sculpting is the different brushes. So the default one is just the F Sculpt Brush tool, or Sculpt Draw tool. But we could, for instance, use the Grab tool. The Grab one is actually, I think it's quite nice for when you're just starting out of a sculpt, because you can kind of influence the overall shape of it quite easily. So if you're doing a head, you could use the Grab tool to try to get the right head shape. Okay, and again, you can change the radius. Okay, some other tools that you might find interesting, the Flatten tool. So you can use that to, as it sounds, flatten. Okay, what else is there? There's a snake hook. The snake hook is good if you want to add a horn or something. Okay, so that's the snake hook. You can play with that. What else do we have here? The clay tool is kind of nice to just add a bit of texture to something. Okay, so you can see I can just kind of build it up gradually. I don't really know what I'm making here. Okay, the last thing I'll show you guys, you can paint with texture. So we looked a little bit at textures with the robot activity. But what I want to do here is click New Texture and bring up my tools again. Oh, not that one. So Shift Spacebar will bring back these other tools. And if I go to Texture, it's going to say this is on the brush, which is what I want. And I'm going to set that up to, let's go with marble. Okay. So now when I paint this, you see it's actually got a marbly texture. So I'm kind of using the clay tool and the marble texture to give it this kind of marbly texture. So that could be quite useful if you're trying to make something look like it's made of stone. You can paint the texture directly on it. Okay, and you could do that for anything. You could even import your own image and paint that as the texture. Not sure how that would look, but you can always try it. Okay, so I think that's where we'll leave it for now. Let me just turn back on my camera. And I want to kind of see what this is looking at. By the way, when you're looking through the camera's eyes, I've hit 0. You can press G to kind of move it around because it's currently the selection. So let me just render that back side of this creature. I don't know what it is, but so you can see it does look quite interesting having the light and the different bumps and stuff. So see what you guys can come up with today.